Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
When you talk about some of the greatest players in the game of the NFL football, the number 12 comes to mind because there are so many to choose from. Join us tonight as Dana Aguster of the Historically Speaking podcast joins us coming up in just a moment. This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. This is your host, Darren Hayes, and we're podcasting from the Pigpen in Western Pennsylvania to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So with Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff supplying us with the tunes, let's go no huddle through today's football history headlines.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
We're so grateful to be joined today in our visit of our Football by Numbers series on number 12 today, and we have a special guest, Dana Aguster of the Historically Speaking podcast, and he's a frequent social media post on all things sports history. I mean, if you haven't heard or seen what this gentleman has to offer, you're missing something, and hopefully after tonight, you're going to listen to his podcast, check him out on the social media. I'm going to bring him in right now. Dana Aguster, welcome to the Pigpen.
Man, thank you for having me, man. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, man. I've been hearing a whole lot about the Pigpen, and I'm glad to be a guest on tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting down with you tonight with some number 12s.
Oh, yeah. We have some great ones. But before we get into those number 12s, why don't you explain a little bit to the listeners what Historically Speaking is all about and what Dana Aguster is all about with his sports knowledge and
Well, let me tell you, the Historically Speaking Sports podcast is something that had been in the works for a while. And it started off with just me just posting little stuff on Twitter on a daily basis. One thing I like to do is my I guess you can call expertise, is not only football history, but sports history in general. And my podcast talks about sports history in general, football, basketball, baseball. I touch a little bit of hockey, touch a little bit of Olympics, touch a little bit on a lot of different different things that would interest me. And I have like a little daily thing that I put together every day. Like this happened, like today in sports history. And that started about a year ago, which was my incident, keeping busy during the pandemic. And it just eventually grew into something. And I had been trying to thinking about doing a podcast for a number of years. And I just never really got around to it. But thanks to some of my friends and some buddies here on the Sports History Network, they kind of convinced me, say, hey, man, why don't you just go ahead and do it, try it, see how you like it. And then that's where it kind of took off from. A little background info on me: I used to be a sports writer for a daily newspaper back in my home state of Louisiana. Did that for a number of years. I also did high school football on the radio for also a number of years doing that. And I do have a little bit of a background in radio. And I kind of was like, I need to get back into this somehow, some way. And the two kind of just came together: podcast, radio experience, sports history. Hey, here it is. This is where I need to be, right here. And
but it definitely shows because of professionalism that your podcast, I mean, you have a couple episodes out right now. I've listened to them both, and I'm really excited about it. I'm a big fan of it because first of all, you get the people going. You have the music going in the beginning. It's just, it's a catchy tune. It gets you in a vibe. Then you come on and you have these great segments that you're consistent on, and you tell the people what, hey, this is what we're going to do. Here's the main event, and bam, you hit them right off the bat. And then you go into your other segments. It's a beautiful work of art. And the listeners, as soon as you get done with this podcast, you got to go check out that Historically Speaking podcast on the Sports History Network. But
speaking of, man, right before we came on, my latest episode dropped like maybe 30 minutes before I came on. So I'd been working on that for a good part of the weekend, and I just threw something. I put something together, and I just got another one just cranked out right before I got on. So hey, there
awesome.
we go. So you got something to do right after you get off with me. So
all right, well, that's great. That is awesome. Well, we have you coming on today because we want to talk about the number that I think a lot of people have been looking forward to is our series of Football by Numbers, the number 12. And probably some of the biggest faces throughout football history wore the number 12. It's a really big number, especially in this day and age. We have some real superstars that have worn this. And you had a few things that you wanted to talk about before we started getting in these numbers. So I'm going to leave it over to you here.
Well, look, number 12 is the most revered, in my opinion, the most revered number in football. Every other sport has a number that is just up there that's above everyone else. And basketball is 23 for Michael Jordan, obviously. Right. Baseball is 42 for Jackie Robinson. And hockey is 99. But as far as football is concerned, there's a couple that could make a serious run at number 12, but in my opinion, the number 12 is just synonymous with greatness, and it's the quarterback position, the most important position in football. And so you have that number that just is in reverence for every football fan. I mean, if you think of really great teams, the best player on the team throughout history, more often than not is number 12. But what I want to start off with today is, since it's February and it's Black History Month, there were two very important black quarterbacks who wore number 12, two of them. Okay. And I want to start off with them, and it's a little bit of a personal thing with me for both of them because these two quarterbacks attended Grambling University. I attended Southern University, which is Grambling's arch rival. So I love talking about these guys, but a part of me is like, why do I have to talk about them?
You're bringing
Southern Grambling.
You're bringing rivalry in the mix early here, my friend.
That's what I do. I like to. That's one thing about me. I like to stir the pot.
That's it. Stir that pot.
And one thing about HBCUs is that when it comes down to game time and it's on the field, we leave it on the field and we give credit where credit is due. The first one I want to go to is of the number 12 is Doug Williams.
Oh, he's a great one.
Doug wore number 17 at Washington, but during his years at Tampa Bay, he wore 12, and he was very instrumental in that team reaching the 79 NFC Championship game against the Los Angeles Rams. He had a great team around him, with Jerry Eckwood and Ricky Bell and Jimmy Giles. He had some weapons around him, and he utilized those weapons. And, of course, he had a very good defense backing him up with Hall of Famer Leroy Selman. But Doug Williams was like the first black quarterback that I remember watching as a kid. I grew up watching. My football fandom starts off in the late 70s, because I'm 47 years old and about to be 48. But I remember watching Doug Williams play, and he was just phenomenal. And I remember him even more in the USFL and then later on with the Redskins. But that's the first number 12 I want to get into is Doug Williams. The second one is another Grambling graduate, and that's James Harris, who played for the Buffalo Bills in the late 60s, but made a name for himself with the Rams in the mid-70s, leading the Rams to the NFC Championship game in 74, I want to say. So those two I want to kind of get into right off the bat, since it's Black History Month, and you have two very good quarterbacks. James Harris one thing about James Harris, his nickname was Shaq, by the way, and Shaq Harris was, if you don't know him or don't really remember to recognize the name, he was basically Cam Newton before Cam Newton. because he was a big quarterback. He was 6'4", 220 in the 60s playing quarterback.
Yeah, that's a lineman back then.
And he had a rocket for an arm that was unbelievable. And when he went to the Rams, this is a little-known story, that when Carroll Rosenbloom hired Chuck Knox as head coach in 73, Chuck Knox was his second choice. His first choice was actually Eddie Robinson to coach the Rams. And Eddie seriously thought about it. He really thought about it. But then at the last minute, he changed his mind. He called Carroll Rosenbloom back and said, "Look, I can't leave Grambling." And the main reason why Carroll Rosenbloom wanted Eddie Robinson is to coach James Harris. That was the main thing, was to coach James Harris.
And he coached him in college, too, correct? Yeah.
I think he coached him in college. Eddie Robinson coached Grambling pretty much since the beginning, all the way until the mid-'90s.
Oh, yeah. Great coach. Yeah, that's plenty of history there with Eddie Robinson. Wow, I didn't realize that he was the first choice to be the Rams head coach. That's interesting. And he turned it down to stay at Grambling. But he was there for...
this is just a little stats on James Harris. Had 45 touchdown passes. He played for the Bills. He played for the Rams. He also played a little while for my team, the Chargers, and led the Rams to the 74 NFC Championship game. Yeah,
nice. Yeah, good quarterback. Some great stats here. If 69 to 79, he was in the NFL. Played on some good teams, too. So that's definitely a good one to bring up. Definitely under consideration with our search. Tonight we decided, I forgot to tell our listeners, we decided we're going to try to find the top 12 number 12s in this discussion tonight. So we're going to go hard at us. We're going to give you plenty of examples of some great number 12s to think about. And James Harris and Doug Williams are two good ones to have under consideration because they definitely are worthy of the consideration. So where do you want to go from?
From here, I want to I got some other notable 12s that didn't quite make the list. Didn't make my list of 12 12s. So let me go through it real quick. When you talk about Charger quarterbacks, since I'm a Charger fan, let me start off with my team, the Chargers. And when you talk about Charger quarterbacks...
Just so the listeners know, I can see Dana right now. You can only hear him, but Dana's wearing a bright blue hat with a big lightning bolt on it. Definitely showing his fandom for the Chargers. So please continue.
When you think about the Chargers, you think of at quarterback. You can go back to John Hadle. Maybe you can also go back in the 60s and talk about Tobin Rote. You could talk about, of course, Dan Fouts and Phillip Rivers. But the only quarterback to lead the Chargers to a Super Bowl wore number 12, and that's Stan Humphreys. Another Louisiana guy. Stan
Humphreys broke my heart because I'm a Steelers fan. I'm not apologetic about it. He really broke my heart. There was a 94 or 95 in that AFC Championship game in Pittsburgh where San Diego wasn't even supposed to be in consideration of thinking about winning that game, and they came into Pittsburgh and just dropped a big old bomb on us Steelers fans. The pit of our stomach was aching after that one. So Stan Humphreys definitely did some damage that day.
I mean, if you really look back at that team in '94, we shouldn't have even been in the championship game because the Chargers fell behind 20-3 the week before at home against Miami, and Stan Humphreys brought them back to a late touchdown pass to Marseille in the corner of the end zone to beat Miami in the divisional round. But Stan Humphreys has a big spot in a lot of Charger fans' hearts, including mine. And plus, he's a Louisiana kid, so that's another thing right there.
A little home cooking.
Okay, another guy. Yeah, you got to have the home cooking, especially if you're from Louisiana. You got to have home cooking. Another guy is Chris Chandler. Now, I live in Atlanta, and he's still in a little bit of reverence here in Atlanta. Actually, the next two guys that are part of my honorable mention list are former Atlanta Falcon players, and that's Chris Chandler and Chris Miller. Chris Chandler led the Falcons to the Super Bowl against Denver, which was Super Bowl 33. And Chris Miller was the quarterback of the 91 Falcons, which I call the too legit to quit Falcons. He was the quarterback then, and with Jerry Glanville as the coach, and Andre Rison and Deion Sanders part of that team. That's another notable number 12.
Right.
Also doing my research, I came across Vinny Testaverde.
Oh, yeah.
He mainly wore 16 through most of his career, but he had a couple of episodes with Cleveland and Baltimore where he wore number 12. And he was the Ravens' original starting quarterback when they first started in Baltimore. I think it was the 96 team. 96.
Yes, I think you're correct.
I remember, and he really took off. They took off that franchise. And Vinny Testaverde is one of those quarterbacks where he's a lot better than what history may kind of want to portray. Because he played for a long time and he had decent numbers and decent performances, but it wasn't always consistent with him.
Well, my biggest measuring stick that I always like to look, especially with the modern quarterbacks, so I'd say Testaverde is more of a modern quarterback. I like to look at that touchdown to interception ratio, because that sort of tells how they cared for the ball. And Testaverde is almost 1 for 1, 275 touchdowns, 267 interceptions. And 46,000 yards is nothing to sneeze at. That's a great career. But, definitely a very good quarterback, Heisman winner with the Miami Hurricanes. I believe Jimmy Johnson was his coach back when he was with Miami. Miami had a...
Yeah, it didn't hurt to throw to Michael Irvin
definitely.
either.
They had some talent down there. It was like quarterback and wide receiver back in the 80s, I think that college was. They produced some good ones.
That's right.
They had some great defenders,
too. University of Miami was loaded with defenders, loaded with them. Another quarterback, and he's kind of like, in my opinion, I'm a big baseball guy. He's kind of like the Gaylord Perry of these quarterbacks, and that's Gus Ferrat. And because he played for everybody. He played for a lot of different people. He played, Washington, Denver, Detroit, Cincinnati, Minnesota, St. Louis. It sounds like the itinerary for a Delta Airlines trip.
Oh boy, you're right. You're right on the money there.
But Gus Ferrat was actually a pretty decent quarterback. Unfortunately, people are going to remember him for getting a concussion while trying to headbutt the side of FedEx Field when it first opened. He was celebrating. He ran in for a touchdown and headbutted
That's right.
the wall there and got a concussion. And I think it was a Monday night game that happened, and it was like he didn't realize that behind that padding was solid concrete, and gave himself a concussion.
Worst time to do something like that's on national TV.
Yesterday. Yeah, it was. I think it was a Monday night game he did that on, and I'm like, oh my god! And he headbutted the wall and he started holding his forehead and stuff. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what did he do?
Well, those are definitely some great quarterbacks to bring up. Well,
we got a couple more. Lynn Dickey, go through them real quickly. Lynn Dickey, he was like one of the first quarterbacks I remember as a kid growing up because I collected football cards for like about 5 minutes, and he was one of the cards I had was Lynn Dickey. Charlie Johnson was another one. He was another okay quarterback from back in the day. Played for the Cardinals, Oilers, and the Broncos in the 60s and 70s. You have a punter on here, punter/kicker, Don Concroft for the Browns, who played forever. And near and dear to my wife's heart. My wife is a big Saints fan, and making the list is one of the few non-quarterbacks on the team on this list, and that's Marcus Colston. My wife is a big Marcus Colston fan. Was a big Marcus Colston fan when he played, and he was probably the most famous number 12 of the Saints. And my wife's a huge Saints fan.
Well, those are definitely some great names that we're going to have to probably do some thinking about here as we go to our top 12 of the number 12 in this journey tonight. Now, I guess maybe a great place for stepping off. I think that we're probably I think we can probably come to some agreement. We have 8 Pro Football Hall of Famers that the Pro Football Hall of Fame has declared wore the number 12 during their careers. And there's some really big names on here. And I think what we've been normally doing is talking about them a little bit. And normally they're getting almost that automatic bid into our top 12 for tonight. And I don't think there's going to be any argument about these guys. I mean, we have just alphabetical order. We have Bradshaw and Greasy and Arne Herber, which maybe not a lot of people remember, but he was an early Packers quarterback under Curly Lambeau. Jim Kelly, Link Lyman, who we talked about earlier in our segments because he wore some lower numbers, I think number 1 or number 2 during a lot of his career. Then we got Broadway Joe Namath, another great quarterback. Kenny Stabler of Oakland Raiders fame, and Roger Staubach of the Dallas Cowboys. Those are our 8 Hall of Famers that I don't know that I could have an argument to take any of those fellas off of the top 12, number 12s. How about you?
No, you don't. The only thing is that, Lyman, I don't really know that much about because he was a lineman, okay? Or defensive lineman, I think. Well,
he was a two-way player. Because I know he was a two-way tackle. I mean, this guy, early 1920s. Let me tell you a little bit about Link Lyman. His real name was William Roy Lyman. Link was his name. I think that's just a badass football name, Link Lyman. That just kind of scares me. I don't really want to go up against a guy named Link. You don't know what you're coming up to. Sounds like a part of a chain, But he played in the early 20s in the NFL. So remember, the 1920s, 6'2" and weighed 233. Back in the 1920s. That's a large man for that era. He was a member of 3 straight NFL championship teams.
He was a large guy.
3 straight championships. The 1922 and 1923 Canton Bulldogs, and then the 1924 Cleveland Bulldogs team. He joined the Chicago Bears on a barnstorming tour that featured Red Grange and played with them for a few years. He was with the Bears the balance of his career and even won another NFL championship with them in 1933. And he sort of created the shifting defensive lineman because he didn't stay in one position. He was so flexible, such a great athlete. He moved up and down the line. It was almost somewhat linebacker-ish because he was kind of fluid in his motion, very athletic. And through his whole career, 16 years in the NFL, only one losing season in 16 years on multiple teams in multiple cities. He's a great football player. I mean, that's a little bit of what I know about Link Lyman.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you could play up that long period of time at tackle, and playing both ways, you're doing something. I mean, plus, you look at the size and athleticism, and plus you part the shift into the along the defensive lineman going from the A gap to the B gap or whatever. I think he might have been the one to probably invent that. Because that's something that you normally didn't see. You saw that and you look at old films. You see the defense, you see the offense, going to what I guess was called the Notre Dame shift, but you didn't see defensive play. Once they did, you stood there, and I think Lyman probably brought that into the fore when you talk about defensive players.
Right, yeah. I mean, today's NFL, you might see somebody go from like a 0 technique to a 3 technique on the line, but usually don't see them going out to the 5s and outside of that. And
right.
It sounds like Link Lyman was one of those kind of ball players that could do that. So that's a tremendous ball player.
Wow, that's impressive.
But as long as we're staying old school, let's talk a little bit about Arne Herber. I don't know if you know much about Arne, but he was another early NFL player.
Yeah, he was a great Packers quarterback from the
1930 through 1940 with the Packers. They spent a couple years with the Giants after that.
Yeah, he was. Was his favorite receiver? What's his name?
Don Hudson.
Number 14.
Don Hudson.
Hudson. I watched that in Alabama. Don Hudson. He was probably the Jerry Rice of the pre-1950s.
Absolutely.
Because he had every receiving record, and his touchdown receiving record wasn't broken until Steve Largent until 89.
Yeah, that's something.
So he was doing something back in the day, but Herbert was the one that's getting him the ball. He was the first real great Packers quarterback.
Definitely. I mean, he threw a touchdown in his very first pro game as a 20-year-old, in 1930. That's just amazing. Think about what 1930 was. That was, the Great Depression era is happening. And you have a 20-year-old kid coming out of college and throwing a touchdown in an era where you don't really pass that much on a Packers team that like to run the ball. So it's great.
When you talk about the Packers pre-Favre, all you think about is running backs, or going from Jim Taylor and
Paul Hornung
and Hornung to the 70s with John Brockington and those guys. Most of my football expertise is pretty much from the 50s onward to now. And I'm starting to learn a lot more about the early days, the way old school, rusty, dusty days of the NFL.
Rusty, dusty. I like that. Yeah, You'll find with a lot of the partners we have here on Sports History Network, Mr. Chapman loves to get into that. He loves that era, the 1920s. That's maybe the only time the Lions were really a superior team, so that's what he really likes it. But, Joe Zagorski and Joe Zimba, they get into that, those great old days. And I love them, too. There's just some great football back then and some real characters that played the game back then. So those are sort of our old-time gentlemen that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that wore the number 12. I guess next week probably want to go to the 1970s era with some Hall of Famers there. And we've got 3 or 4 really good ones that were on there, probably the top 4 quarterbacks in the NFL of the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, 5 of them. I guess maybe place to start is the Super Bowl MVP of Super Bowl number 3, Joe Willie Namath. He's down from your neck of the woods, played at Alabama.
Broadway Joe. Yep, from Alabama. Well, from Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania.
Actually, he's from my neck of the woods growing up, but he's played ball for Bear Bryant. So. Yeah,
Joe Namath, I think, was of all the players, of all the 12s that are in the Hall of Fame, Joe Namath may not have been the best quarterback of the bunch, but I would like to say that Joe was probably the most important, in that he, of course, won Super Bowl III and gave the AFL legitimacy. But also what he did was he brought to position something that it hadn't had before, and that's swagger. And he had the mustache, he had the fur coat, he had the nightclub in New York City, he had the TV show. This guy had more swagger than you could shake a stick at. And he was probably the most important of all the quarterbacks on this list as far as bringing something to the table that it hadn't had before. Now you think about the 60s and the quarterbacks there, and the great quarterbacks. You had Unitas and Starr and all the Dawson, Hadel. Those guys were very good quarterbacks, but as far as swagger, Joe Namath had this more swagger than any of them put together. Now, the only other person that probably would have had just as much swagger, but it's kind of suppressed with him being in the NFL, was Sonny Jurgensen. But Namath had swagger on top of swagger, and plus he could back it up. It's just amazing that can you imagine what it would have been like if he had better supporting cast around him offensively and two good knees?
Definitely. But even so, he played on a pretty good 69 Jets team that won that Super Bowl. But he was 5-time Pro Bowler, and for the Jets, and he played a little bit for the Rams. But of course, his better years were probably with the Jets. That's what he's most remembered for.
Yeah.
But they were. I don't think people appreciate how heavily of an underdog the Jets were against the Baltimore Colts in that Super Bowl III game. It was, it probably wasn't even close. It was. I don't even know how to compare it to any other Super Bowl, because I think that was probably the biggest betting line difference between the two teams of any Super Bowl that I can think of. I think it was 11.5 points or something. It was a spread between that end.
It was something big. But even them getting to the Super Bowl was something of a surprise, because they had to win 2 playoff games to get there, which was unusual. And they had to play the Chiefs, which was 1 year away from winning theirs. And then they played the Raiders, and there was a rematch from the most infamous game in AFL history, the Heidi game. And that game was at Shea Stadium, and the Raiders, I think, were favored to win that one. Because they were the defending Super Bowl champions, and they had crushed Kansas City earlier that year, and it was almost a foregone conclusion that somehow, Namath was going to choke up, but the weather kind of like was in their favor at Shea Stadium with the swirling winds and the cold weather kind of affected the Raiders more than anything, and it was like the errant lateral pass to Charlie Smith that the Jets recovered to seal it, but the Jets were just a very, very balanced team, and that team was more along the lines of don't mess it up, just play the game, play within yourself, and what Reeve Eubank was telling them the whole time. Just don't mess this up. Don't try to do more than what you're capable of. And that's exactly how they did it. To get to play Baltimore and ended up beating the Colts in Super Bowl III. That was probably the most important game in the history of pro football with one of the most important players ever, because he brought to the position the element of being the element of confidence and swagger.
I totally agree with that. Well, as long as we're on it, we're sort of segueing right into our next quarterback. Maybe we should talk about was not a Raider at that time, but became a starting quarterback of the Raiders a few years after that, and then especially in the mid-1970s. Ken Stabler. What do you think about Ken on our list?
Well, Ken Stabler is another Alabama quarterback.
Right.
He followed Namath, right after at Alabama. And, Alabama fans remember him as the run through the mud against Auburn.
1967 Iron Bowl, that was.
At Legion Field.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When he had to run through the mud. And one of my dad's favorite quarterbacks, because my dad's a crazy Raider fan, and left-handed quarterback, and he's one of those guys that if you are behind, if you're playing Snake Stabler and you're ahead by a touchdown or less, you might as well just go ahead and cancel Christmas because he's going to find a way to win.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when he was with the Raiders. Now, what happened, I don't know what happened in the time that he went to the Oilers when he wore 12 at the Oilers, because he got lost his way there for a minute. But which was really disappointing because he was going to a really stacked Oilers team when he joined them in 1980. But when he was with the Raiders and he had Biletnikoff and Branch and Van Egan and Clarence Davis, I know all these guys because of all of my dad telling me about them since the time I was little, trying to persuade me to be a Raider fan. That's the reason why I'm a Charger fan. Anyway, and that's one of the reasons. But anyway, Snake was one of those guys that they called him Snake for a reason. And the reason was that he was just so crafty and you look at film of him playing, and you notice that he could stand back in the pocket and just stand there like a statue, and nobody's around him. Okay, he literally had all day to throw it, and his accuracy was uncanny throwing the football.
Absolutely.
It was just amazing.
His Super Bowl game against Minnesota in Super Bowl 11, it doesn't look like that great of stats in today's NFL, but he was 12 of 19, which was pretty good for a Raiders team that liked to run the ball a little bit, and had 180 yards against the Purple People Eaters defense. And that was just a tremendous outing as the Raiders won that game 32-14 over the Vikings in that Super Bowl. He's had 194 touchdown passes in his career, a .661 winning percentage. Definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Definitely, I think, on our list of 12 for today we're talking about. Now,
well, one thing about Stabler that you had brought up, of you being a Steelers fan, is that the Immaculate Reception would have happened. If it never happened, the most impressive and the greatest play of that game would have been Stabler's. I think he ran like 30-some yards through the Steeler defense to score the touchdown to give the Raiders the lead. He had like this long run down the sidelines for like about 30-some yards, and nobody could catch him, and he scored. Right, with like about a minute or so left.
You're right. There was
the immaculate reception.
That was the only touchdown of the game up to that point, too, I believe. I think it was all field goals before that.
Yeah, I think it was. It was a cold, wet day at Three Rivers, and Stabler broke away, and once again in replacement of LaMonica, who seemed like he always got hurt, and took the ball down the sidelines and scored. And this was like when he was like his second or third year in the league.
Definitely was. Definitely the Snake Stabler on that list. Now, why don't we transition? Let's go to our Dallas Cowboys quarterback. Came from Navy, Roger Staubach. All-American quarterback, was a Heisman winner at Navy. Great quarterback with the Dallas Cowboys. Absolutely.
You're talking about Captain America, Roger the Dodger. He had more last-second rescues than Errol Flynn. He would come back there with his scrambling ability. He would come out of there and the Cowboys were behind, and Roger had the ball. You might as well just call it a day. It's like he's going to figure out a way to get the Cowboys down the field and score that last touchdown. He did it over and over and over and over again. One of the games that I remember watching was, I think it was, his very last regular season game. I remember watching that as a kid, and when he played Washington, and he brought them back like 2 or 3 times. John Riggins was just running all over the Cowboys, and he brought them down the field, and he threw the last second touchdown pass to Drew Hill in the corner of the end zone at Texas Stadium. And with like 9 seconds to go, that was his last regular season game, and he brought them back down the field and he scored. And if there was anybody that was Tom Brady in the 70s, minus the Super Bowl championships, it was Roger Staubach, because he was just that kind of guy that if you gave him a chance, he was going to figure out a way to get it done.
You know what's amazing about that? And it's interesting you say, have a little bit of comparison with Tom Brady. Staubach, after he won the Heisman, he served a 4-year commitment to the Navy before he could go in the NFL. So he was a rookie at age 27 in the NFL. And so losing those first 4 sort of learning seasons as a young NFL quarterback probably knocked some of his statistics down, but he still had an awesome career. 153 touchdowns, Super Bowl winner and MVP of Super Bowl 6. Just had some great battles, with those Raiders teams and the Steelers teams of the 70s. Probably if it wasn't for the Steelers, he'd have a couple more Super Bowl victories in there too, because they were definitely Super Bowl 10 and Super Bowl 13 with the Steelers and the Cowboys, both 4-point games. And Staubach, the Cowboys didn't lose because of Staubach. He was just a tremendous player. And growing up a Steelers fan, I remember the 70s pretty avidly. That's when I started watching football. But Roger Staubach and Ken Stabler were 2 of those quarterbacks that were just sort of the pain in the butts for the Steelers. And Stabler, you could dislike the Raiders because they just had sort of that aura about them. And Stabler was sort of that Buccaneer swashbuckler guy of that Raiders team that were just the bad guys of the NFL, and they sort of liked that moniker. But Roger Staubach, like you said, Captain America, you just couldn't dislike the guy because he was just a solid football player, and he was a pretty nice guy from everything I've seen. Good Christian, very moral, dedicated to the Navy for 4 years instead of going and making money in the NFL, and after winning a Heisman, there's nothing but all respect for Roger Staubach, and I could just never dislike the man, but boy, I hated when the Steelers had to play against him, though. He was a great quarterback.
Well, look, let me tell you, he had the hitch in the Navy, okay, and not only that, he had to come back into the NFL and basically outgunned basically Craig Morton for the starting job because Morton had led the Cowboys to Super Bowl V, and he had to sit behind Morton and maybe a little while behind when he came out of the Navy. I think Don Meredith might have still been playing, so he had to sit behind two very decent quarterbacks to get his shot, and he finally got his shot during the 71 season when Landry, for some reason, decided to play both of them at the same time, which was a disaster. And he finally settled on Rodgers, and the rest is history. And everybody remembers his very first miracle, bringing the Cowboys back. I think they were down by 17 points with 2 minutes to go against the 49ers one time at Candlestick in the playoffs, and he brought them back and scored through quick touchdown passes within the span of 30 seconds to win, to bring them to send them to the NFC Championship game in 72. They ended up losing to Washington that year, but that was
through the original Hail Mary pass.
His career from that point
pass
forward.
It's called the Hail Mary against Minnesota in an NFC Championship game.
That's right,
too, to win that game. So great quarterback. Now we have two other. Those are some great quarterbacks we talk about from the 70s. When you're talking about, Namath had some part of his career in the 70s. Stabler and Roger Staubach, but probably the two biggest number 12 quarterbacks in the 70s we haven't even got to yet. And I think the first one we got to talk about because he led an undefeated team to a Super Bowl win, even though he got a little bit of help from Earl Morrall. But Bob Greasy of the Miami Dolphins fame. What do you think about Bob?
Bob Greasy is basically the prototypical system quarterback. You would ask him to do whatever you need him to do in an offense, and he could do it. His passing statistic isn't all that great because they didn't throw the ball much. You have Zonka kicking Morris behind you. Why would you run the ball? Why would you throw it? And then Greasy has the record for fewest pass attempts in a Super Bowl with 7? He threw 7 passes in a Super Bowl, and then you got then the receivers that he had were not scrubs. They were not. You had Paul Warfield on one side, you had Howard Twilley on the other side, you had Marv Fleming and Pete Mandich as tight ends. You had some weapons. You talk about a solid offense that I think could win games now with that offense and that unbelievable offensive line. You could win games with that right now with Bob Greasy at quarterback. And one thing that people don't really realize with Bob Greasy was that he was a scrambler. He was actually very athletic, running the ball and throwing it at the same time. He was very, very athletic, and you don't really see that because of the system that Shula insisted on running. But when he first came out of Purdue,
I
he was
totally agree with that assessment.
He was like
and like you say, when you have a big back like Zonka that just pounded defensive lines to death, the thumper, and then you have the speed outside with Mercury Morris, very aptly named. It's hard to go away from that running game, especially in the early 1970s when that was that was the fad back then, was just running that ball. And Bob Greasy, though, what a great quarterback he was. He had even in college, he had some great wins. He had a win over he played for Purdue, and they had a great win over Notre Dame, and he was 19 of 22 passing and 13 straight completions at one point against Notre Dame. Who was a pretty good team that year. A consensus All-American selection, 65 and 66. And he was a top pick by the Dolphins in the 1967 AFL draft. So he did play in the AFL for a little bit. And NFL Player of the Year in 1971, along with that Super Bowl 7 and Super Bowl 8 victories.
Yeah.
So, very, very good quarterback in Greasy. Well, now I think it's time to get to my favorite quarterback of the 70s, the number 12 of the original TB12, Terry Bradshaw of the Pittsburgh Steelers. What do you got on Terry?
Another Louisiana guy. Louisiana Tech he went to. His career didn't get off to a promising start, but he I think Terry Bradshaw probably, in my opinion, has probably the most textbook throwing motion for a quarterback I have ever seen. The ball, when he threw deep, you knew it was going deep, and it was pretty to watch. And, I mean, his balls were like, the only other person that I could think of offhand whose spirals were perfect like his was Warren Moon. And his spirals were perfect. His throwing motion was perfect, and it was always on the money, and people want to talk about his lack of quote-unquote intelligence, but let me tell you, he had more guts and he had more toughness than a lot of quarterbacks that you could really think of. And he could come through for you in the clutch, and he says all the time, and it's the absolute truth. Every Super Bowl he was in, he threw a fourth quarter touchdown pass, which changed the game, which gave the Steelers the win. The first Super Bowl I remember watching as a kid was Super Bowl 14 against the Rams. And that pass the first long pass he threw to John Stallworth, where he caught the ball over Rod Smith and then took it to the house 74 yards later for a touchdown. That was probably as beautiful and as perfect a pass that you could possibly throw. I mean, Terry couldn't hand the ball to him better.
I think where Bradshaw struggled a little bit was in the short game, because he was almost like, the way Elway was. He wanted to just rifle a ball. It might be a 5-yard out. He's firing a bullet to... Yeah, he's not going to throw that soft one over to Rocky Blyer out of the backfield. It's coming at you. And
he had no touch. He had no touch.
Catch with your hands, man, or you're going to hurt. Oh, yeah, Bradshaw. Two-time Super Bowl MVP. Just a great quarterback, really saved a franchise from, they were a 1-13 team when he got there, and Chuck Noll brought in, Mean Joe Green as his first NFL draft pick the next year, taking Terry Bradshaw. An interesting story not a lot of people know is that at Louisiana Tech, Bradshaw sat the bench behind a celebrity, the patriarch of the Duck Dynasty franchise, and I forget the gentleman's name now, but the father of that Duck Dynasty television show was actually a starting quarterback at Louisiana Tech, and Terry admits as much as that he sat behind him. Robertson, great man, and it's kind of interesting that came to be that Bradshaw sat behind him at Louisiana Tech. Phil Robertson, that's his name, Phil Robertson.
Now, that's something, it's true that you learn something new every day, because I did not know that. I had no idea about that when he was at Phil Roberts. Okay. But, La Tech have always had great quarterbacks. Terry Bradshaw was the one who started, but, watching Louisiana Tech growing up as a kid, they've always had really, really good teams who love to throw the ball. They have always been a passing program. You had Tim Rattay, who was there, who played for the 49ers for a little while, and a few others who I can't think of right off. But Louisiana Tech was people talk about the women's basketball team, but their football team was pretty good as well.
Okay, well, definitely I think those are our 70s quarterbacks. All were very good. Now, a little bit more contemporary, more from the late 80s in the mid-90s, Jim Kelly, another Western Pennsylvania high schooler that became a starting quarterback in the NFL and made it to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. What do you got on Jim Kelly?
The original great quarterback from the University of Miami. I remember watching him when he was with the Houston Gamblers of the USFL, to show you my age. I remember watching him under Mouse Davis over there at the USFL, and putting up ridiculous numbers in the Astrodome. And that's when I really, really started to watch him. And then when he went to the Bills and the K-Gun offense and all of the weapons that he had in the 4 Super Bowls, that was a fun team to watch, And, of course, a lot of that fun came at the expense of my Chargers, but that's another story. But they were so much fun to watch.
If I could, just before we get away from that USFL career, I thought this was an amazing stat. 2 years with the Gamblers, he threw for 9,842 yards and 83 touchdowns in 2 seasons. I mean, sit there and think about that for a second. It's almost 5,000 yards in 2 separate years and over 40 touchdowns in each of them. Amazing.
Well, that was pretty much the birth of the run and shoot offense when it came to pro football. The run and shoot offense is basically is one of the most is the most fun offense to watch, but it also could be the most difficult to run. Because you have to be on the same page with the receiver, and the receiver and the quarterback have to read the same thing and be on the same page. And not only just one receiver, you're talking about 4 wide with no tight end. Okay, that's the run and shoot essentially. And for you to run that offense, you're gonna put up numbers. That's like, you know, to shift gears to college basketball, they had a coach named Paul Westhead, who coached Loyola Marymount, who was coming up with these ridiculous scores, scoring 100. They scored one time. They scored 140 points at LSU in college basketball. And basically, what it was basically get the ball, go down the court, and then shoot it. Whoever got it, shoot it. Paul Westhead would bench you for not shooting it. So. The run and shoot was like that, and Tom and Jim Kelly was the perfect quarterback to run that system because he was so brainy and he was so smart with defense and reading defenses and stuff, and it helped to have guys like Don Beebe and Andre Reed, who was also very smart receivers as well. And that's why the K gun worked so well, was because you had Marv Levy who developed this offense of no huddle, you know, the offense, the quarterback and the quarterback and the receivers reading the same things. And teams in the late 80s, early 90s didn't know how to defend it. They just didn't know how to. And plus, the weather in Western New York didn't help matters, especially when you got to December and January. It didn't help playing in Buffalo. But for some way, somehow, Jim Kelly could throw that ball in that cold and that ice. You know, I guess it was part of that Western Pennsylvania, heritage, I guess.
You get used to it. You really do. But another amazing fact about Kelly, okay, he had 11 seasons with the Bills, had 17 playoff appearances, including the 4 Super Bowls, which weren't his best days. But in the 17 playoff games, including the Super Bowls, he tossed the ball for 3,863 yards and 21 touchdowns. I mean, that's like a full season plus a game, and to throw that much in those big games against the best competition in the AFC and the NFL that's pretty good statistics, pretty good numbers for Kelly.
Yeah, Jim Kelly was one of the great big game quarterbacks. Of course, it didn't always translate in the Super Bowl, but his best Super Bowl was Super Bowl 25, and a defense that was pretty much geared to stop the passing, and he still had a big game. And the architect of that defense in Super Bowl 25 with the Giants was Bill Belichick. So he basically outthrew Bill Belichick, but it came down to a last-second field goal, unfortunately. But, his the way that, and plus I forget about that, he had James Lofton playing with him too,
as a veteran,
which was one of the best. He was one of the best receivers of the 80s that people forget about. It was James Lofton when he was with the Packers, and he had the easy long stride. He was just a very, very easy target for Jim Kelly, during those early years, the 2 Super Bowl years with the Bills. He was just remarkable.
And like you said, him and Andre Reed were probably 2 of the most intelligent wide receivers, probably ever to play the game. Very cerebral wide receivers to go with a very cerebral quarterback. Great combination there.
Right.
Okay, so just in retrospect, we're going to put these 8 Hall of Famers into our 12. Terry Bradshaw, Bob Greasy, Arne Herber, Jim Kelly, Link Lyman, Joe Namath, Ken Stabler, and Roger Staubach. We have all those Hall of Famers to talk about, and I think we're in a total agreement that we're going to have a surefire Hall of Famer in number 12, the new TB12, that everybody's more famous one, and that's Tom Brady of Patriots, the New England Patriots fame, and now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What do you have on Tom Brady?
Well, Tom Brady, I remember watching Tom when he was at Michigan. I remember watching him. He sat behind, I think was it Drew Henson he sat behind, I believe it was.
I think you're right.
And he finally got a start in the Orange Bowl. He led him to the Orange Bowl, I should say, against Alabama in 2000, I want to say. And then ended up going to the Patriots. And when he went to the Patriots and he got his chance against when Drew Bledsoe went down, I said they may have something. They may have something. But I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't a Patriots fan, obviously. And as it's one of those things where you recognize greatness when you see it. And when you saw Tom Brady lead the Patriots against the Rams in Super Bowl 36, you were like, okay, we may have something here. He may be a really, really good one. He may be really, really tremendous. And he really was, to say the least. Now, I do have some mixed feelings with Tom Brady because he ended my Chargers seasons a few times, actually. But, it is what it is. To put it that way, it is what it is. But I get into this discussion all the time, whether he's like really the greatest of all time. And before this season, I was like, no, because I don't think he could win it without Belichick. He proved me wrong. He really did prove me wrong.
I think he proved everybody wrong on that one.
He proved me wrong. And I was like, there's no way he can win without Belichick, because I figured that it's Belichick. Belichick is the guru. He's the man on top of the mountain with the white robe and everything. Like he's football's Yoda.
That evil hooded genius of the sidelines, as us Steeler fans like to refer to him as.
Right. So, but he, like I said, he ended my Chargers season a number of times, and a couple of times I'm like the one that haunts me the most was when we were 12-2. We were Marty Schottenheimer was our coach, and he came down to San Diego, and they put a number to us. They really did.
Oh, I know the feeling, because Tom Brady definitely was a thorn in the side of the Steelers' aspirations to go to the Super Bowl more than one occasion. There's a couple AFC Championship games that took place in Pittsburgh that Brady and the Patriots just came in and just crushed the dreams, just like we talked about Sam Humphrey doing a little bit ago.
Yeah. I'll tell you about it. But Tom Brady is, he's the GOAT, and it takes a lot for me to say that. It does. It takes a lot for me to say that. Yeah, he is the GOAT.
How about that stat now? With him winning this most recent Super Bowl, he has more Super Bowl wins than any franchise in the Super Bowl era. That's just amazing. A quarterback, a player, started and won more Super Bowls than any franchise has won. That's
ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. It really is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
but it is what it is, and he's won all those Super Bowls and been that great of a player, his whole career, and he's tied to pretty much one coach for the bulk of his career. I'd say like 9/10 of his career with one coach.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, remember, I told you how I love the statistic of the touchdowns to interceptions, and usually, when most quarterbacks, you say, that's a great career when you have like a 2-to-1 ratio, touchdowns to interceptions. Brady, another just ridiculous stat, 581 touchdowns, only 191 interceptions. That's phenomenal. That's almost 3-to-1.
It's almost sickening. You know what I mean? It's almost sickening that he has that many touchdowns to interceptions.
And it's just under, he's 79,204 yards passing in his career. He's going to hit that 80,000 mark easily if he plays this coming year, which sounds like he's going to. Just a tremendous ball player for all 21 seasons that he's been in the NFL.
And you got to take into consideration what would he have done had he not gotten hurt that 1 year where he missed the whole year.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
He had that one career, that one season, the year after they went 18-1 or 19-1, and the first game out against Kansas City, he got tackles him low, shredded his knee, and he's done for the year.
Yeah, that's true.
And what would the record books would look like if he would have had the whole year? Because he's not one of those guys that gets hurt. And plus trying to get injury reports out of New England is what you'd be better off trying to get Soviet missile secrets.
Well, you with those one-liners tonight, boy. You got him going. Yeah, I mean, just listen to some of these awards he's got. 14 Pro Bowls, 3 times as an All-Pro, the 7 Super Bowl championships, 3-time league MVP, Tom Brady. I mean, when you say have the word GOAT up there, I don't know in football. I don't know you can have any other face than Tom Brady's anymore because. Well,
at least for quarterback, in my opinion, he's of all the players in NFL history. He's, in my opinion, in my humble estimation, he's the 5th greatest all-time player. Period. Yes.
Oh, but that might be time for another episode here. We might have to have you on because I'd like to get into that a little bit more. But today we got to talk about these number 12s because we still have a bunch of them to talk about. But I think we can both agree that Tom Brady should be in that list of 12. So that takes up 9 of our slots if we have the 8 Hall of Famers and Tom Brady. And I think another one that we could probably agree on played in Green Bay this past year as a number 12. What do you have to say about Aaron Rodgers?
The first time I saw Aaron Rodgers was he played when he was at Cal. I'm a UCLA fan, and I don't know why I'm part of the teams from Southern California, but I just am.
In the same color scheme.
Yeah, same color scheme, but I watched him play against UCLA, and it was like every pass he threw was caught. Every single pass he threw was caught, and it was effortless, and he brought that into the NFL. Now, when I saw him that night, which was always talked about how he was sat in the draft room waiting to get drafted, I just kept saying to myself, whoever picked this guy up, he's going to blow the league up. I'm telling you, he's going to blow the league up. Then when he heard he was going to the Packers, I'm like, I don't know. They're going to trade him because Brett Favre's still there. So he's going to sit behind Brett Favre. Really? You think that's going to happen? And a lot of my friends were saying, I don't know if he's that good. He kind of looks shaky and everything. I'm like, bro, I'm telling you, I've seen this guy play in college. He is the truth. He is the real deal. And he was. He came out and he just set it on fire, like I said he would. Because he's one of those type of guys that it don't take much for him to get motivated. You could say something just something about his dog, and he'd be like, oh yeah. Well, I'm gonna show you, right? And that's the way he is.
We talked about how ridiculous Brady's touchdown to interception ratio is. Well, Aaron Rodgers is even more ridiculous. 412 career touchdowns, only 89 interceptions. That's better than 4-1 on that ratio. I mean, that's just phenomenal.
You want a quarterback in any kind of capacity. You want a quarterback to take care of the ball, and he is the personification of taking care of the ball. I can't recall Aaron Rodgers throwing a bad pass, like a pass that's like you go back and like, I don't know if he would have thrown that. And I think that Green Bay deserves somebody like that coming after Brett Favre, who he never met a pass he didn't like. I mean, he's throwing across his body and down this way, and throwing behind guys and stuff. Aaron Rodgers is so precise.
You may have 31 other franchises arguing with that they think Green Bay deserves another quarterback like Aaron Rodgers after Brett Favre, though. That's quite the blessing for Green Bay fans to have 2 outstanding, and Aaron Rodgers is definitely going to be a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback as well as Brady. Definitely
back to back, having a quarterback, 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks back to back. I mean, you don't have several franchises who have two Hall of Fame quarterbacks. In fact, you get them back to back. Plus, with the illustrious history of that franchise, anyway. I mean, the rich get richer. That's sort of in that way.
Right now, some of his awards in the NFL. He's a 9-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro. 1 Super Bowl championship, unfortunately, against the Steelers, and also a 3-time MVP, league MVP. Great quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, definitely on our list. Okay, so now we have 10 spots filled up between our Hall of Famers and putting Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady on there. We got to come up with two more names to put on this list. And you mentioned some good ones beforehand. There's also a couple other quarterbacks I have in mind, unless you have some that you want to talk about that were great number 12s.
Well, I'm going to talk about two of them. One, okay. I remember watching in high school, and I thought that if he would have stayed healthy, would have changed the quarterbacking position forever, and that's Randall Cunningham. Yep. Had he stayed healthy with the Eagles would have won multiple Super Bowls, I felt. But the problem with that was that team was so defensively heavy, for one thing, and he didn't have a lot of weapons, and plus he got hurt. So Randall Cunningham could have changed the game for quarterbacks in the 90s, because when I think of Randall Cunningham, I think of that play on Monday Night Football against the Giants. I think it was either Leonard Marshall hit him or Chip Banks or somebody hit him, where he basically, he's in the air, he caught himself, picked himself up, and threw a touchdown pass. I saw that, I said to myself, this dude is unreal, and I saw that, I said, you've never seen anything like that before, ever. And I think I was like a junior or senior in high school when that happened.
I totally agree. He was a 4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro, won the 1988 Bert Bell Award, 1990 Bert Bell Award, just under 30,000 yards passing, 207 touchdowns. I mean, yeah, what an athlete Randall Cunningham was. A great quarterback. And like you said, he doesn't get hurt as often as he did. He really could have done some damage in the league. So definitely a candidate for one of our two. Who's your other quarterback? You said you had two of them.
The other one, I think history gives him something of a bum rap because he was always good through his career, but he got the notoriety toward the end of his career, and that's John Brody for the 49ers. People don't necessarily remember John Brody, but he really didn't become a really superstar quarterback until the late 60s, early 70s, especially when they got Gene Washington at receiver. Because that really opened up the offense, because he was always a thrower, and that team was always defense back then. But when John Brody got Gene Washington, he finally found somebody to throw the ball to. And then you had Ted Kwalik, the tight end, which is one of the most underrated tight ends in NFL history, with Ted Kwalik. Those two guys gave John Brody finally some targets, and it showed in 1970 when they finally reached the NFC Championship game. Eventually, they lost to Dallas, the last game at Kezar Stadium. They went to the NFC Championship the very next year against Dallas again. But John Brody was one of those quarterbacks that the numbers don't bear it out, but if you really think about his career, he was one of the really great, solid quarterbacks. He was the greatest quarterback in 49ers history before 1979. He was by far. Now, even better than YE2, I think. It was John Brody.
Interesting. Now, the one thing that I have that I would say I would question a little bit about putting Brody on our list is his overall record as a quarterback. And he played on some bad teams in San Francisco. He played on some very good ones. But overall, his record was 74, 76, and 8. That's probably an era where you don't want to go to that touchdown interception ratio because there's quarterbacks putting the ball up. So it's not a good stat for that era. But that win-loss record, I think, is an important one to do it. As opposed to, Cunningham had a little bit better record. But Cunningham had a little bit better win-loss record, even though his career was shorter. I think I would probably take Cunningham over Brody a little bit, but I'm not totally sold on either one of them yet, because I've got a couple quarterbacks that maybe we should be in this discussion. One of them is Joe Ferguson, that played for the Buffalo Bills. Ferguson was a righty that came out of Arkansas and played with multiple teams, most famously with the Buffalo Bills. Played with Detroit for a little bit. And my computer's freezing up here to give you all the stats on him. But Ferguson And I wish I could have his win-loss record, unless you have it up right now that you can see.
Joe Ferguson, for what I remember, a lot of this I'm just going right off memory. Joe Ferguson was one of those quarterbacks that was just another great system quarterback. He started his career handing the ball off to O.J. Simpson, okay, and he which wasn't bad. But he led the Bills to a number of playoff wins. He's one of the first quarterbacks, another one of those quarterbacks that I was easily influenced by because of how young I was watching him in the late 70s and early 80s. I remember one playoff game against the Chargers where he had the Chargers dead to rights, and the Chargers pulled it out in the last seconds. But he had some really, really good teams in Buffalo in the early 80s, throwing to Frank Lewis and handing the ball to Joe Krebs. And, they had some really good teams in Buffalo with him as the field general. But, Joe Ferguson is a great, great, great name, great quarterback. I think there's another underrated quarterback in history who has a bum rap historically.
And I do have his record up now. He was also at a losing record. He was 79-92 as a starter, 196 touchdowns, 209 interceptions. But again, that's that era, especially with O.J. Simpson in the backfield for a lot of his career. Probably not a good stat to look at. The other quarterback that I had that I wanted to talk about is what do you think about Rich Gannon? Famously of the Kansas City Chiefs, the Oakland Raiders, played in the Super Bowl with the Raiders.
Another underrated quarterback. And another thing about him that was so underrated, like early in his career when he was with Minnesota, he was a scrambling quarterback, another scrambling quarterback. And people don't remember his mobility so much because he really didn't have to do that when he was in Oakland with that great offensive line throwing the ball to Jim Brown and Jerry Rice. But I believe he was the league MVP one year, the year they went to the Super Bowl, correct?
Yes, he was.
I remember that. And he was an outstanding quarterback. He should have been to 2 Super Bowls, but he got chipped out of one. We're not going to talk about the Tuck rule. But anyway, the Tuck rule won't be brought up. But anyway, Rich Gannon was a very good quarterback for a long, long time in the league. And on my top 10 list, I had him on here. The top 10 list that I had made, I put him on. He was on my list. So
that's sort of my sleeper. I wanted to save him because you look at his quarterback record: 76-56. 20 games over 500, 180 touchdowns, 104 interceptions, threw for 28,000 yards, and part of his career, he was playing behind some other, very good quarterbacks that were on the same roster as him, and in multiple teams, multiple offensive coordinators, but still had a brilliant career. And I sort of pounding the table. I think Rich Gannon deserves some consideration to be put on our list with some of these other three names. Another one that's somewhat questionable because he didn't have a very long career. At least we don't think so right now. But that's Andrew Luck. Interesting quarterback that wore number 12.
I have, and one of the subheadings I have on mine is like, I have 2 quarterbacks who could be listed as what could have been. Okay. One is Andrew Luck. He could have been the true successor to Peyton Manning in Indianapolis. He could have led the Colts to multiple Super Bowls. I saw that coming. Okay. Another quarterback that people forget about because his career only lasted a few years, and that's Greg Cook of the Bengals.
Interesting.
He was another number 12. If he would have stayed healthy and his shoulder wouldn't have given out, he would have been credited in NFL lore as the man who started the West Coast offense because he was under the tutelage of Bill Walsh. Walsh was the quarterback's coach for Cincinnati during his rookie year. He came out of the University of Cincinnati. But Greg Cook could have been credited for the man who started the West Coast offense because Walsh learned it from Al Davis, and Al Davis, of course, learned it from Sid Gilman. And Walsh just kind of ran a different derivative of it and just kind of perfected it. But Greg Cook was the first true student of the West Coast offense, and he was phenomenal. I think his first year it was a typical rookie year, but you saw flashes of brilliance with that Bengals team, and that was the Bengals' first year, and they came very close to making the playoffs that first year in the AFL.
Really he only had starting experience he played 2 seasons in the league with the Bengals, only 1 year of win-loss record. He was 4-6-1 with the Bengals in that 69 season.
But people talk about Greg Cook as far as like what could have been with him, because he showed flashes of being a very, very decent, very good quarterback. You talk to Bill Walsh and Bob Trumpy, who played with him. People bring up Greg Cook's name a lot. Andrew Luck, had his career been longer, we would be talking about possibly the new, Brady Luck Super Bowl could have been this year. The new rivalry, possibly the AFC between Mahomes and Luck. Or Lamar Jackson and Luck. He could have been within that new era of great quarterbacks in the NFL.
Okay. That's pretty much who I have for, I think, under consideration. You have some guys that wore number 12, but not for very long, didn't have the careers, like Daryl LaMonica's and right. We've had some, wide receivers and some kickers that have had it, some very good players, but didn't wear the number for a very long time. Steve Smith wore the number 12 for a few years. Percy Harvin and Michael Jenkins, Mohamed Sanu. But I don't know if they can stand up to the statistics of these great quarterbacks that we talk, especially when we're down to our last 2 spots. And I think we might be at that spot where we've sort of got to come to Jesus here on our last 2 players that we want to put on there. And who are you thinking those 2 should be?
I think Randall Cunningham could be on that list at the number 12 because of because of his contribution to the Eagles and how he's still remembered with the Eagles,
Mm-hmm. And I think he sort of paved the way for some of our modern day quarterbacks, between him and Fran Tarkington, probably helped out a lot. The Russell Wilsons and Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jacksons. Yeah, I think those definitely he was a trailblazer for that style of quarterback play. And I don't have a problem at all of having Randall Cunningham on that list. So now we're down to 1. And who are we saving that last spot for?
I would actually defer to you because you brought up Joe Ferguson. I know that John Brody, Joe Ferguson is kind of like what and what, I think they're kind of like, you got, but at the same time, you can't argue with Rich Gannon. You can't argue with Rich Gannon.
I think I'm leaning towards Gannon a little bit because of his win-loss record, playing for multiple teams, having that NFL MVP, Super Bowl victory. The stats are there, and I think deservedly so. I think I would give that nod to Rich Gannon if you're in agreement with that.
Yeah. I think because he went to led the team to the Super Bowl and was league MVP. So you can't argue with that. Ferguson and Brody were 2 very good quarterbacks who had some lean years and had more interceptions than touchdowns, but you have to, but I think Rich Gannon could be the one that you would really have to go with.
Yeah, I think that hardware holds a lot of weight when you're talking about, I know the Pro Football Hall of Fame considers that a lot. There's a lot of great quarterbacks that don't get in the Hall of Fame when people think they should because they didn't have that Super Bowl championship or, didn't have that league MVP season. But Rich Gannon has both of those, and I think deservedly so gets on that list. So in retrospect, let's review here. We're going to go with Rich Gannon, Randall Cunningham, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and then our 8 Hall of Famers, which we had as Bradshaw and Greasy, Link Lyman, Arne Herber, Ken Stabler, Joe Namath, and I'm missing one, Jim Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Those are our dirty dozen, the greatest players wearing the number 12 in the NFL, and that's coming from Darren Hayes and Dana Aguster. And Dana, do you have what do you have coming up on your podcast that we can look forward to in the near future?
Well, the one that dropped tonight was I did a show like I explained it in the beginning. Like I had a conversation with a buddy of mine, and we just started talking about things in sports that you don't see anymore. And not only just in football, but in sports in general. And basically we talked about, and basically in my show this upcoming week, I'm talking about, for example, whatever happened to Wide World of Sports?
Okay.
Whatever happened to Wide World of Sports? Whatever happened to the college All-Star games? Whatever happened to, stuff like, things of that nature, things you don't see anymore. In basketball, what happened to illegal defense? That's something that has gone by the boards that you don't see anymore. Stick 'em in the NFL. I know it's outlawed, but I talk about stick 'em. I talk about another thing in football I talked about was once upon a time they had something called the Bert Bell Playoff Bowl.
Oh yeah,
which was the two third place teams playing against each other, for charity. I think it was.
Well, it was a way to make
teams playing.
It was a way for the players to make a little bit extra jing in their pockets because there wasn't a lot of playoff games back then, and those teams that were third and fourth place didn't make a whole lot of money, so that was an extra. It was a charity game, but the players also still got paid. And we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. We have Bert Bell, who was a former commissioner of the NFL. His son, Upton Bell, I have an interview that we've talked with him, and we're going to be airing that on February 25th, which is Bert Bell's birthday on the podcast. And
all right, cool.
Upton Bell has a terrific history himself. I mean, he was the player personnel director of the 1960s Colts, with Unitas and all those under Don Shula, Weeb Eubank, all those great teams. And he also lays claim to fame, Upton himself, of helping to rename the New England Patriots. They were the Boston Patriots, and then for a spell they were called something else. And Upton helped name them. I won't ruin that for our listeners, but some great stories coming up on February 25th on the podcast. But I'm sorry. Please continue with your podcast.
That's mainly what I'm talking about. And plus, we have the top 5 this week, and like top 5 stories of sports history that happened this past week in history includes, of course, there's something that happened last week. There's something happened this week, this past week in sports history that you remember where you were, either watching it or hearing about it. You have to listen to find out what I'm talking about.
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Well,
you remember when you hear about this, you're like, I remember where I was when I first heard about that. And you were shocked when you heard it.
Well, that's very interesting. So we'll definitely have to listen to that. This will be actually we're filming in we're taping in mid-February here. This is probably going to be right around the early 20s of February, so probably about a week and a half after the recording this. So Dana will probably have a couple podcasts out since then. So make sure you go back and check out his episode 3 of his podcast, is what he's talking about. That's dropping just before we started recording this. Dana, you have, before we let you go, we greatly appreciate you spending the time with us and talking about these number 12.
I was looking forward to it, man. I really was looking forward to it. Yeah.
And we're gonna have to have you on again for some more numbers. But before we let you go, why don't you give everybody, if you want to, your social media call out numbers where they can see some of your great stuff you post on social media?
Well, my Twitter feed is historically SP and the number 2. Historically SP and the number 2. That's Historically Speaking Sports. It's the name of the site. It's the name of my podcast, and you can check me out. I post stuff every day on the Historically Speaking or historically SP2 Twitter handle. I do that every single day. It varies on different times or whatever, but I have something planned every day that I put on there, and it's become a labor of love for me, and I really enjoy doing it every day, and I learn something new every day when I do it, and it's something that I've enjoyed doing. I have a big following that I didn't expect I was going to have when I first started, and then I was, and a lot of my friends had talked me into doing it, and finally I took their advice and started doing it, and it's now turned into this, and I'm loving every second of it.
Well, they're very well done. I follow you on Twitter, and it's excellently done, well timed on all your Twitter feeds that you're putting out there, and all your tweets, and the graphics that you put with it are just outstanding, and they really capture the essence of what you're saying in your tweets. So they're very well done there. And when everybody can find your podcast on the Sports History Network, and what days and how frequent are you releasing those?
Well, I release those. I try to have them out every Sunday, but so far I haven't been able to, to really get the timing right and everything. But I'm trying to get it down where it come out like every Monday morning to talk about the week before. But mainly it's been coming out on Monday and Tuesday, or Wednesdays or whatever. But pretty soon I'm trying to get the routine down so I can get it come out every Sunday night, Monday morning or so. So look for those right at the beginning of each week.
Okay, listeners, here you got it. So you don't miss a second of the Historically Speaking podcast. Make sure you subscribe to it, and you'll know as soon as Dana releases it, because he's really got some great stuff there. It's really well put together. Dana Aguster, I really appreciate you coming on. We're going to have you on again here soon to talk about some more great, exciting sports history. But we appreciate your time, sir, and it was really a lot of fun. Thanks.
Oh, man, I had a blast, man. I can't wait to come back as a returning champion.
All right. Thanks, Dana. What a great guest and what a great visit we had with Dana Aguster of the Historically Speaking. Make sure you check out his podcast and check out all the other podcasts at the sportshistorynetwork.com, including this podcast you're listening to, because there are some great ones there. And we have plenty more of the hosts of some of those podcasts coming up in our Football by Numbers series in the coming weeks. So until tomorrow, everybody, have a great gridiron day. Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorum Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.